Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've gotten a couple of viewer comments recently regarding lost fish and whether or not I had suggestions to prevent them from losing fish in the future. And as much as I'd love to sit here and say that I've got the absolute perfect situation to prevent you from losing fish in every case, I don't really think that's possible. I think the majority of fish that we lose, the angler really has no control over. I think a lot of times the fish have the ability to gain leverage on the angler and use that to throw the hook. I also think a lot of times we just end up skin hooking the fish and therefore they're able to pull off quite a bit as well. So, from that standpoint, I don't know that every situation can be managed by the angler. Now, having said that, I do think that there are a lot of things the angler can do to prevent them from losing fish in the future. I think there's a lot of errors that anglers make that increase the odds of losing the fish that they end up hooking. So, I want to share with you today a bunch of the different things that you can do to limit the number of fish that you lose, which hopefully can take you from having a bad day on the water to having a good day on the water and maybe catching a personal best. Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app, which will help you select the best fishing places in the lake with features like the lake level, the current flow, the top baits tool, which will help you select the best baits for certain locations throughout the lake. Whether that's a clear water, stained water, dirty water, it'll choose the best bait for that location, provide you with all the information like what structure, what retrieve, different reel, all of the information that you need to catch the fish. This is in the app. The cool part about this app, though, is it's not just based on areas. It does provide you with specific tournament winning data that has been collected to help you figure out your best choices for baits and locations for whatever region of the lake it is that you want to fish. On top of that, not only does the app provide you with best locations, it gives you water clarity as well. So maybe you're on a lake like Lake Eufaula, where there is a bunch of different water clarity located throughout the entire lake. This will help you identify the clearest portions as well as the dirtiest portions of the lake. Plus, the Deep Dive app has now added the wind effect map, which is going to take all of the different wind conditions for the past couple of days and show you what banks on the lake are being hit the hardest. They also have inflow points that show you different places throughout the lake where your water is being flushed into the lake through different ditches and creeks and rivers, providing you with high percentage places to fish and letting you know what parts of the lake are going to be the best areas after a rain. Check out the Deep Dive app to help you become a better angler. So, my first suggestion to you has to do with your casting distance. A lot of anglers feel like the further they cast, the more bites they're going to get. Whether they're in a boat or they're fishing from shore, a lot of anglers just want to let it fly and really make long casts. Well, a long cast is probably the biggest reason why anglers lose fish. And the reason for that is simply you're not going to penetrate that hook point into the fish's mouth nearly as well as you will when you're casting 50 or 60 feet from the boat. So when your line is 100 feet out, you go to try to set the hook, you really lose a lot of power between the bend in your rod, the stretch in your line, and that fish's ability to move just a little bit. Quite often when you set the hook with a lot of line out, you've actually got a pretty good arc in your line as it falls to the bottom or wherever that fish is. So from that standpoint, you generally don't get a great hook set. And if the fish goes to jump at that point and they have any leverage at all, they throw the hook very, very easily. So if you can manage not to make very long casts, you're better off making a shorter, more controlled cast. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you want to be 10 feet away from the fish, but instead of making a cast that's 100 feet out, position yourself to make a cast that's 50 or 60 feet out, and you're probably going to be able to get the same bite from that fish, and you're going to be able to land them much easier. So that's the first thing. The next thing really has to do with your rod selection. Generally speaking, your rod, if you choose the wrong rod for the technique, can be a hindrance to you. So if you want to be throwing a Texas rigged worm or flipping a jig, you probably shouldn't be using a moderate action rod or a blended rod. or a fiberglass rod, because all you've got then is a pretty stretchy noodle of a rod, which has a hard time driving the hook point home in the fish. And the same can be said the other way around too. If you're throwing baits that have exposed hooks or treble hooks, you probably don't want to be throwing an extra fast rod, because then you're actually pulling the bait away from the fish much faster, preventing those hooks from getting caught in the fish's mouth. So choosing the right rod is another key factor that goes into limiting the number of fish that you have. The last part of your terminal equipment there that you're using that could be a wrong choice is your fishing line. The fishing line has a lot of stretch to no stretch. So if you're throwing, again, say a jig and you're flipping it on monofilament, you're going to have a lot more stretch there. So you might not be able to drive the hook home. If you're fishing a frog, you probably want to be throwing braided lines so that you can drive those big frog hooks home. But it really goes back and forth. If you're fishing a crankbait, again, and you're throwing it on braided line, chances are you're probably going to pull more hooks out than you would if you were throwing monofilament or a fluorocarbon line. So you want to make sure you're also choosing the appropriate line based on the technique and the rod and reel that you're choosing. So that's another issue that really comes into play. Now, I would also mention that one of the biggest reasons people lose fish has to do with their hook set. It's not necessarily they're setting the hook wrong, but they're setting the hook out of position. And what I mean by that is they're getting caught off guard, and they're in an irregular position to set the hook. So maybe they get a bite with their rod tip way up high, and then they try to set the hook from that position. Not going to work real well. Maybe they're holding the rod with their body turned in a different position and they try to set the hook. If you're out of position when you go to set the hook, chances are you're not going to drive that hook home nearly as well as you would if you actually reeled down to the fish, set the hook, or did it in the manner that you feel most comfortable with. I think quite often anglers are taken off guard when they get the bite and they set the hook just out of instinct, and therefore that causes issue. Another thing would have to do with the fighting of the fish to the boat. If possible, you want to do everything that you can to keep the fish down. The fish can gain the most leverage on you when they come up and jump, and that just has to do with the speed of a head shake when they jump is way faster than it is underwater. The faster it is, the better they can get that bait whipping around, which can dislodge the hook. So if you can, if possible, and I know it's not always possible, try to keep the fish from jumping, whether that means you change position of the rod to pull them back in a different direction, or maybe you put the rod tip way down in the water to try to pull them back down away from the surface. The point here is if you can limit the number of jumps, you're going to have a much better chance at landing that fish. And the same thing goes for when you're fighting the fish. You see a lot of people who like to really control the fish. So they got the fish by the side of the boat and they're whipping the rod back and forth. The problem with that is every time you move the rod back and forth, you're actually moving the potential of that hook. So if you do that a lot and there's no real reason to try to change the position or the angle that that fish is going, you're probably better off just pulling the fish in a certain direction until you can land that fish versus trying to force them back and forth. You see it quite a bit where anglers are really whipping the rod tip around to try to put the fish in the position that you want them to be in to land them. The reality is you're probably better off actually playing the fish out without trying to reposition the fish and just kind of get them to glide to you on the surface of the water. Easier said than done, but it is something that will definitely help you as well with respect to landing those fish. So those are some of the main points or main reasons why people lose fish. If you can limit all of those factors, you're really going to put yourself in a better position to land more of those fish, which can lead to a much better day of fishing on the water. Generally speaking, every time I lose a fish, I like to go back, analyze what I did. Was I out of position on the hook set? Did I make too long of a cast? Did it just pull off on me and I feel like there was nothing I could do? In either case, I'm always trying to learn from every one of those lost fish opportunities because that's how I become a better angler. So hopefully this helps you guys. Let me know in the comment section. Do you have other suggestions for other viewers to learn from you and your experiences that will help them or prevent them from losing fish in the future? We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.